How's it going? Mike here, and this is my second time recording this voiceover because I am a total idiot. But welcome to the first episode of Retro Game Guide. I've been thinking about relaunching this channel for 3 years apparently, but a lot has happened in that time. I got divorced, I got a new house, I moved into this beautiful office, then I had to take it all apart because we had to upgrade our electrical panel, and I also am getting married, so yay me. But anyway, now that there are literally a million YouTube channels that are covering retro games, I thought it was the right time for me to jump back in. So hit that like button, click on that notification bell. Yeah, I feel gross saying it. And listen to me talk about one of my favorite franchises ever, Castlevania. Let's get to it. Konami. The company that gamers love to hate. But it wasn't always that way. Back in the 90s, Konami was at the top of its game, releasing classic after classic, chief among those being the Castlevania series.
Attack is awesome, and those dudes in Castlevania are pretty intense. And I'll even admit that the sound of Konami games is jamming. But realistic? Give me a break. Konami video games, so real, they'll blow you away.
In recent years, Konami's pretty much done everything in their power to piss away that goodwill they built up with gamers way back in the day, but they continue to release games nonetheless. Their main bread and butter these days are pachinko machines, which are branded after some of their iconic franchises, including this, let me check my notes here, erotic Castlevania machine. Wait. What? Was anyone asking for this? Why does this exist? Anyway, on the video game front, many of these releases have been repackaged and well curated, I might add, as collections of their classic games released on 8-bit and 16-bit systems. Here, I'm playing the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, which I'm playing on the Nintendo Switch. This collection is comprised of all the mainline Castlevania games released on the NES, Game Boy, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, and it's very well put together. You've got a digital art book, save states, an encyclopedia! But wait, there's more. You also get Japanese versions of a few games. This includes the Japanese version of Castlevania 3 Akumaju Densetsu, which used a specialized sound chip, the Konami VRC6. And let me just push up my glasses, which added 2 extra square waves and a sawtooth wave to make the soundtrack more rich and full. Both the US and Japanese soundtracks are fantastic, but there's something special about the way the VRC6 chip enhances the music. This collection is a no-brainer in my opinion, and it's the easiest way to play the pre-Metroidvania Castlevania games on a modern console. For those of you who love Symphony of the Night and its predecessor, Rondo of Blood, there's Castlevania Requiem on the PlayStation 4 and 5. You are in luck because this release contains those 2 games and those 2 games only. Rondo originally released on the PC Engine CD or Turbo Duo until it was released on the Wii Virtual Console. This collection is fairly bare bones compared to the Anniversary Collection. There's no digital art book, no Japanese versions of games to choose from. It's pretty much just the games with some very modest options in the option screen. But making the video game sounds come through the controller is a nice touch. If you haven't played either of these releases and own a PlayStation, these are 2 absolute classics that you need to experience. I just wish it was available on more platforms other than the PlayStation. Hell, even if you have played these games and you enjoy them, this is a pretty decently cheap option to play them, given the prices of both are currently a fifth of the average rent in California. Thankfully, I still have my copy of Symphony of the Night, but I will probably go to my grave without an authentic copy of Rondo because I just don't care to spend several $100s to have a game sit on my shelf. But I digress. Next up, we have the Castlevania Advance collection. Now, this is a compilation of all the Castlevania games released on the Game Boy Advance, and a bonus game, Dracula X, which released on the Super Nintendo. You've got Circle of the Moon, Harmony of Dissonance, and Aria of Sorrow all together. It's available on the Switch, PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. All of the games included are excellent choices, and they include many features that are also in the Anniversary Collection, like save stage, digital art scans, an encyclopedia, and the ability to record and rewatch yourself playing Castlevania because no one else is going to do it. The three Metroidvanias are all fun to make your way through, although my feeling is they get better as the franchise keeps going. Aria of Sorrow is better than Harmony of Dissonance, which is better than Circle of the Moon in my opinion, but you really can't go wrong playing any of these unless you do it on an original Game Boy Advance, which you can't see anything. Dracula X is kind of the odd man out here because it's neither a Metroidvania nor was it even released on the same platform as the others. It just seems like it was kind of included as an afterthought, kind of like Rob the Robot with the original NES. It's just a stripped down version of Rondo of Blood. It's fine, but as a Castlevania game, I don't know. I would just rather play Rondo of Blood. It kind of just feels bland and not as interesting as the original, like eating a piece of toast while thinking about a steak. Maybe you have nostalgia for it, but for me, it's my least favorite on this collection. On a side note, it's like the 15th one of these I've done this video, it'd be nice if Konami was inspired to repackage and re-release a collection of the Nintendo DS games while we're at it. But that's it for Konami's preservation to date with Castlevania. That brings me to 3 games which Konami hasn't given a shit about since they were available to purchase since they were originally released on the Nintendo Wii. The Rebirth games were all developed and released in 2009 by the acclaimed retro game preservation studio M2. Known for high-quality emulation collections, M2 built Contra Rebirth, Gradius Rebirth, and Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, all from the ground up, and they are all complete reimaginings of the games from each franchise. Gradius Rebirth is a remix of levels from the previous Gradius games. Contra Rebirth takes a lot of inspiration from Contra 3 The Alien Wars. And Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth is a complete overhaul of the original Game Boy release. I say overhaul because it doesn't have very much in common with the original release, other than a few enemies here and there, as well as the title and the whip power-ups. But for the most part, this game is an all-new adventure that has been pretty much unavailable since the Wii Shop Channel was taken down in 2019. Rest in peace, you sweet Wii Shop Channel music. Now, there are other ways to obtain these games, but officially you can't purchase them on any platform. If you have a Wii U or a Wii that is special, you can download them and add them to your Wii, but I do not condone piracy at all. I bought all 3 of these games seriously back when they came out, but my original Wii bit the dust, so I had to resort to magic to restore them. How to do that is outside the scope of this video, but let me know if that's something you'd be interested in watching in a tutorial in the comments below. Warning, I'm about to get into some pretty in-depth spoilers for this review of Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth. If you want to experience this game for yourself for the first time, why are you watching this? Come back later. Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, that's a lot to keep saying over and over. I'm going to shorten it to Rebirth for the rest of this video. Rebirth is a traditional, mostly linear Castlevania, not a Metroidvania. That means you walk forward, you whip stuff, you collect items, you fight a boss, and then you move on to the next stage. I say mostly linear because there are alternate paths that you can take that'll lead you to the boss and the next stage, adding some replayability to the game. In that way, Rebirth shares much more in common with Rondo of Blood than it does with its inspiration, Castlevania the Adventure on Game Boy. In that game, Christopher Belmont uses ropes to traverse from screen to screen. I suppose this was a limitation of the platform, being that it was the first Castlevania game to release on a handheld system, but in this game, you're back to using regular old stairs. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few enemy types that are shared between both games, these eyeball enemies being one example, but for the most part, this is a completely new experience. It starts out pretty typical for a Castlevania game, but Rebirth immediately shows you that there are branching paths that you can take within a stage, with keys being the main way you open up these alternate paths. This is a gameplay mechanic taken directly from Rondo, where you find the key as an item and then you use it to unlock a door somewhere within the stage. If you lose the item or you die, then you can't open the door. Many of the branching paths amount to rooms with multiple levels on the same screen. You can choose to enter a door at the top or the bottom, but they don't necessarily vary all that much from each other than the items and enemy placement. Early on, the branching paths are much more distinct areas with their own unique assets, whereas later in the game, there are more deviations from an already present theme in each stage. Now, in Rebirth, not all of the doors are alternate paths. Some of them only contain whip upgrades or other items. You may want or even need those things to defeat a boss, but you may be missing out on accessing a different part of the stage. This is probably a good time to talk about upgrading the whip. Like Castlevania the Adventure on Game Boy, you can upgrade your whip twice. You start out with the rather short and useless leather whip, upgrade to a longer Morningstar whip, and then finally you get a temporary fireball projectile whip. Now this only lasts 30 seconds, and this meter at the top immediately starts ticking down as soon as you pick up that third power-up. You can, of course, restore it again with another orb power-up, which will start the clock over at 30 seconds. Sub-weapons are also back, including many of the ones from previous games like Dracula's Curse. You've got the dagger, holy water, the holy cross, they're all in this game, and they require hearts for each use. Being that there are literally hearts everywhere in this game, I always had a healthy supply anywhere I went, and by the time I made it to a boss, I had plenty to use. One huge difference between Rebirth and previous Castlevania games I want to highlight is character control. In previous mainline Castlevania games, once you committed to a jump, you were committed, for better or worse. But in this game, Christopher can change his trajectory in mid-air. It gives you a much easier time dodging various flying enemies and projectiles. You can unlock a classic mode if you want, which will take this ability away, but for me, I prefer to play like this because it helps me to be better able to control my character and avoid cheap deaths. Graphically, I like the aesthetic the Rebirth games present. They're all familiar but original in their design. The levels themselves cover everything from Dracula's castle to courtyards to caverns and clock towers. It's all pretty standard stuff for Castlevania, but well represented here. A few of the rooms in later stages encompass environmental puzzles that I want to mention. You need to figure out a particular order of enemies to kill in order to proceed. This room full of bone pillars was a pain to navigate until I figured out how to reliably get to the other side without getting knocked back into the pit. What's really impressive to me are the boss fights, which are all pretty memorable and stand out. The gigantic stone golem boss in Stage 4 was fun to master, as was the Frankenstein's monster fight in Stage 5. It's all just basic pattern recognition and execution, but I never felt like the fights were unbalanced or unfair, with the exception of the final boss fight with Dracula, but I'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about the music, since I spent a good minute going over the soundtrack to Dracula's Curse. The music in Rebirth is fantastic. While most of the tunes are remixes of tracks from previous Castlevania games, M2 did an awesome job picking standout tracks to reimagine here, and they really get you going as you're playing through the stages. Here's a few of my favorites. Okay, it's time to talk about the final boss fight with Dracula. So, in previous games, he usually comes in 3 forms. Well, the same is true here, and he's completely manageable in those first 2 forms. First, you wait for him to appear, whip him in the head, and then take out his projectile. Rinse and repeat. No problem. The second form, he turns into this weird demon bat monster, which you may have seen before, which you have to navigate both projectiles from his arms and also fire from his mouth. I was able to figure out that pattern within a couple of tries, but what was infuriating to me was Dracula's third form. It's a mess of on-screen projectiles flying at erratic patterns designed to solely catch you off guard. While most of the game I felt was super fair, this last boss fight was fairly rage-inducing. I must have tried 20 times before I finally eked out a barely victory against him. I mean, just look at this shit. Maybe I'm just not as good at Castlevania games as I think I am, but having to refight those first two forms over and over again just to get annihilated by the final form in a matter of seconds was frustrating. But I'm not going to let that take away from it. It is a good game. I mean, all the Rebirth games are really good games that Konami has seemingly just completely forgotten about. It would be nice to see them put out a re-release collection of all three of these titles. You know, I'll take an erotic edition if that's what it takes to put these back out. But unfortunately, the only recent Castlevania game they've even bothered to put out is Grimoire of Souls on Apple Arcade, which it's bad. That's all I can say about it. It's just bad. It's not very much of a Castlevania game, nor is it one that I would recommend playing, no matter how erotic it gets later. I tried it for a few hours, you know, unlocking various characters and abilities before I just deleted it from my iPad altogether. The seemingly endless grinding is just not what I'm personally looking for in a Castlevania game, but I'll give it credit where credit is due. You know, at least they tried to bring together various characters from the franchise's past into the same game. That's kind of cool. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review of Rebirth, and I look forward to dropping a new one of these every Sunday moving forward. Until then, take care, have fun collecting, and thank you for watching.